Hi, I'm Wendy Hollender, and I'd like to show you the steps for drawing a strawberry in watercolor and colored pencil. The first step is to look at your strawberry closely and sort of trace the pattern that the seeds make. You can see that there's a diagonal that forms in two directions, and if you kind of measure that and use a line, it's a diagonal line in two directions, but they're not evenly with the same angle. They vary a bit. One is more severe than the other. And if you just kind of get the idea of it, and the idea that the seeds right in the center of the strawberry will be further apart, and then as they go towards the edges and the rounding parts on the strawberry, they get a bit closer together. So you make those measurements a little closer together. And then in addition to that, the seeds possibly change direction a little bit, and we'll get more on that later. So first step is just to get that outline lightly with a graphite pencil. And you want to have your own strawberry to look at, and just use mine as a guide, but really draw from your real three-dimensional strawberry and set up the correct light source so that you'll get a highlight on the left side of the strawberry and shadow side on the right, and that the light will be more towards the left side rather than coming straight in front of the strawberry. This is normal scientific lighting from the left, or you can do it from the right as well if you're left-handed. So set that up first, and it's a good idea to take a photograph of that so you'll have it as a reference. Next step, you can see in the upper right corner, I've practiced the pattern of my seeds and how I might want to add my color and my shading. So that's what I recommend practicing first, either on a like I did in a corner of the paper or on a separate piece of paper, so that when it's time to draw, you're ready to go. And then I start to put the seeds inside each of those boxes to create the pattern the way it actually is formed on the strawberry. And so I use colored pencils to do that. Next, I decide where the highlights are going to be, and I actually use some white colored pencil to color in that area, and then a little bit of red around the seeds. And then I go ahead and add a layer of watercolor everywhere else except where I want to leave the color of the paper for my highlights, and then at the bottom of the strawberry where the pigment is gone and it's a little bit whiter at the bottom. So I do that next and let that dry completely. So once my watercolor is dry, I actually take a layer of red polychromo regular color pencil and start to shade right on top of the watercolor, but around my seeds. I don't go over my seeds. And I've also shaded slightly, as you can see, on the right side underneath where I have the stem for the flower coming in. And lastly, I've added some green watercolor on those leaf-like structures at the top, which are actually the sepals of the strawberry. And of course, then I'm going to let that dry as well. And now I want to start drawing my flower. You can see I have one at the bottom of the page. So I've lightly drawn my flower, added a little bit of yellow watercolor and green on the sepals below. So by now you're getting the idea, I think, that drawing a strawberry like this is quite complex because there's so many things going on between the seed pattern and the little indented areas and shadows that creates, and then where is your highlight and where are your shadows and how do those colors vary. So this is a complicated, very advanced lesson, but if you approach it in a methodical way, it's quite a nice challenge, so I do recommend it. I've added with an embossing tool some of the light shiny bits at the top edge of each of the areas around the seeds where it's been, indented, and then there's a little light reflected. So I do that, and they're not going to be as bright as my highlights, but they'll become important later on in a way that is kind of fun. So I do a little embossing, and then I take a red pencil and go over that area so I can actually see what I've done. Now look closely and you can see a slightly lighter arc shape below some of the seeds, which is where I had used the embossing tool and then went over a bit with colored pencil so that it would start to show. Now that I've defined my highlighted area, I move on to my shadow side, and I want to define how I'm going to render the shadow that's forming by the seed pattern, and also because this is the darker and shadow side of the strawberry. So I take a red-violet color and I start to draw a little bit there to shade that area to get an idea of how I want to approach it. So I recommend this approach. So I focused on the highlight area, and then I focus a bit on the shadow area. And next I will be moving on to continuing to render the whole strawberry. So I take my lighter red colors, which are madder and geranium lake in this case, and then I start to add the color over that red-violet shading. So now that you can see, I've got the red color of the strawberry with some nice shading, and my seeds are starting to show up a bit. And I've also done a little bit more of thinking about a reflective highlight and leaving that edge on the right side a little lighter. And now I'm going to add additional highlights on the shadow side of the strawberry, so that these highlights, since I've already put down some color, won't be as bright as the ones in the highlighted area of the strawberry. And then I go in with my red and my madder colors, and I go over that a bit. And I keep working now towards the center of the strawberry. So now you're getting the idea of how complicated this drawing is. I want to say, because I don't think I mentioned, that this is an enlarged strawberry. So rather than draw it life size, I've blown it up quite a bit so that I could get all this detail. And now in this step, I'm starting to work on the sepals at the top with my green polychromo pencils. And I've also used a bit of the embossing tool to start to show some of the veins. And now I start to work on the left side of the strawberry, continuing to add color there to bring out the pattern and get the right values and the right amount of pigment showing on the strawberry. Here I continue to work closer and closer to the highlighted area so it doesn't feel like an empty space, using lighter and lighter values of my red colors to fill in and leave a highlight that shimmers but doesn't look, like I said before, like an empty space. At this stage, I decided to add a cut open section of the strawberry and have the flower sitting on top of it. It gives me a chance to tone darker behind a white flower to set it off. And I thought it would just add interest to the composition. So once I draw it, I use basically the same technique to start to add the detail. And now I continue to layer additional watercolor on the cut section of the flower to get some nice, bright, clean color. And now I've added detail on the flower itself, making sure I show all the sepals surrounding the center part of the flower and get some definition on my petals. And then I add more shading on the cut fruit and create a reflective highlight there. And then I can't help but decide perhaps I should use a group of leaves to fill out the composition. It gives me an opportunity to show more information about the plant. These are distinctive groupings of leaves, and also it gives me a chance to have a nice overlap, creating a dark area underneath my strawberry. I do a light drawing of the leaves with graphite pencil, and then I go into sepia to create a bit of shading and show how my veining will be drawn. And then I like to add a layer of watercolor in green on my leaves. And then I add some cast shadows under my strawberry, giving the illusion that my fruit is sitting on a surface. And finally, I add the final details with polychromo pencils on the leaves. And I think I'm just about finished. So I recommend now, if you enjoyed this lesson and you're interested in trying a strawberry yourself, again, don't copy my drawing. Go out, get yourself a real strawberry and follow my instructions and give it a try. And don't forget to eat your strawberry when you're finished, assuming it hasn't spoiled by the time. Oh, a good point to recommend is to keep my strawberry looking good for as long as possible. I'll refrigerate it every day while I work on my painting. And you might want to know, how long does something like this actually take me? And that's a really good question. Something like this, that's this complicated with so much detail, probably takes me to complete, I'd say about 24 to 30 hours as a guide. So here's my whole progression of steps for you to look at all together. Follow from the top left, the outline drawing, measuring and getting the pattern placement correct, adding in the seeds, describing the light source so I know where my highlight is, adding a layer of watercolor, then starting to layer with color pencil, then adding a bit more of the detail, and I added in a flower, and then I added in a cut fruit, and then I added in leaves at the end. Enjoy and have fun.